The old house settled around me with a familiar groan, a sound as comforting as a sigh from a sleeping loved one. It was the sound of my life, of the 42 years Tom and I had spent within these walls, raising a daughter and building a world. The air in the living room held the faint, sweet scent of lemon polish and old paper from the books that lined the shelves, a testament to my Tuesday cleaning ritual. Through the tall window, the late afternoon sun cast long, dusty golden stripes across the worn oriental rug, illuminating the path from Tom's empty armchair to the grandfather clock in the hall. Its steady, deep-throated tick-tock was the house's heartbeat, a rhythm I had come to rely on in the 2 years since Tom's own heart had fallen silent. I ran a hand over the arm of his chair, the velvet worn smooth and soft as a worry stone. I could almost feel the phantom impression of his hand, the warmth of his presence. Grief, I'd learned, wasn't a storm that passed, it was a change in the weather. Some days were foggy and cold, others held a gentle, wistful sunshine. Today was one of the sunny ones. My daughter, Jessica, was coming over with my granddaughter, Lily. My world, once a sprawling map shared with Tom, had shrunk to the vibrant, precious island of those two. The chime of the doorbell, a bright, two-note song, pulled me from my thoughts. I smoothed the front of my apron, a smile already forming on my lips. The door swung open to reveal them, a portrait of my entire heart. Jessica, my Jessie, stood there, her hair the color of dark honey catching the sun. She had Tom's eyes, a warm, reassuring brown, but her smile was all her own, quick, brilliant, and capable of lighting up a room, or, as it turned out, of hiding the deepest shadows. Beside her, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit, was 6-year-old Lily, a miniature version of her mother, all bouncing blonde curls and wide, curious eyes. "Grammy!" Lily launched herself at me, a whirlwind of pink jacket and the sweet, grassy smell of a child who had just been playing outside. I enveloped her in a hug, burying my face in her hair. The weight of her small body in my arms was the most real and grounding thing in my life. "There's my little sweet pea," I murmured, my voice thick with affection. "Hi, Mom." Jessica's voice was bright, but as she leaned in for a hug, I felt a tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there before. Her perfume, usually a light floral scent, seemed stronger today, a little sharper, as if trying to cover something up. I dismissed it. She was a busy mom, a wife, trying to build a career in graphic design. Of course she was tense. Come in, both of you. I've got cookies in the oven. You can smell them, can't you?" The warm, buttery aroma of chocolate chip cookies was just now beginning to fill the entryway, a calculated piece of grandmotherly magic. Lily's eyes widened. "Chocolate chip. The kind with the extra big chips," I confirmed, winking. As Lily scampered towards the kitchen, drawn by the siren song of melting chocolate, Jessica lingered in the doorway. She ran a hand through her hair, a gesture I recognized as a sign of stress. "Everything okay, honey?" I asked, keeping my voice light. She forced that brilliant smile again. "Everything's great, Mom. Just a lot going on. Big things. Good things." The words were positive, but the air around them felt heavy. We moved into the kitchen, the heart of the house. The late afternoon light made the copper-bottomed pots hanging over the island gleam. I pulled the baking sheet from the oven, the wave of heat a comforting blast on my face, and slid the cookies onto a cooling rack. The familiar clatter of the spatula against the metal was a sound of domestic peace. Jessica sat at the round oak table where she'd once done her homework, a glass of iced tea sweating onto the coaster in front of her. She watched me, her gaze intense. Lily was on the floor, humming to herself as she arranged my collection of mismatched kitchen magnets into a lopsided castle on the refrigerator door. "So," I began, sitting opposite my daughter, "what are these big, good things?" She took a deep breath, the kind you take before a plunge. She reached into her oversized leather bag and pulled out a glossy, professional-looking brochure. She slid it across the table. The paper was thick and cool to the touch. The cover showed an artist's rendering of a beautiful, rustic community nestled in a green valley, with modern A-frame cabins, solar panels glinting in the sun, and a large communal garden. The title was printed in elegant, earthy green letters: Willow Creek Sustainable Living. "Mark and I have an opportunity, Mom. A really incredible one," she began, her voice low and conspiratorial, as if she were sharing a precious secret. "It's a new development project up in the foothills. It's not just houses, it's a community. Fully sustainable, farm-to-table living, a wellness center, art studios. It's a chance to build something that matters. Something for Lily's future." I picked up the brochure. The pictures inside were idyllic. Families laughing, children running through fields of wildflowers, people practicing yoga on a sun-drenched deck overlooking a pristine lake. It looked like a paradise, a perfect world. It's beautiful, Jesse. But what kind of opportunity? The lead developer is a friend of Mark's, she said, leaning forward, her voice dropping even lower. The scent of her perfume seemed to intensify with her excitement. He's looking for private investors. People who want to get in on the ground floor before it goes public. The return is, well, it's unbelievable. We're talking about doubling our investment in 18 months. A small, cold knot formed in my stomach. Tom had always handled the finances. He was the cautious one, the spreadsheet guy. If it sounds too good to be true, Sarah, he used to say, tapping his pen on a stack of papers, it almost always is. Jesse, that sounds risky, I said carefully. Investments like that, they're not guaranteed. This one is different, Mom, she insisted, her brown eyes, Tom's eyes, pleading with me. It's backed by a land trust. The plots are already selling like crazy. We've been saving, Mark and I, but we don't have enough to get the share level we need. The one that really sets us up for life. The one that would mean I could quit my freelance work and be home with Lily Moore. The one that means you wouldn't have to worry about a thing for the rest of your life. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Her skin was cool, her grip surprisingly tight. The desperation was palpable now, a low hum beneath her excited words. I know you and Dad were always so careful, she said, her voice softening, becoming tender. And you built this beautiful life. You have the house paid off. You have Dad's pension and the savings. I'm not asking for a handout, Mom. I'm asking you to be our partner, to invest in our future, in Lily's future. The mention of Lily was a perfectly aimed arrow. I looked over at my granddaughter, who was now trying to teach her stuffed rabbit to stick to the fridge. The thought of securing her future, of giving her a leg up in a world that seemed so much harder than the one I grew up in, was a powerful lure. But Tom's voice was still in my head. Be careful, Sarah. I don't know, honey. That's a lot of money. The savings, that's my safety net. It's what your father and I worked our whole lives for. The words felt weak, even to my own ears. Jessica's face fell. The brilliant light in her eyes dimmed, replaced by a look of such profound disappointment that it physically hurt me to see it. A tear welled and traced a slow path down her cheek. I understand, she whispered, her voice cracking. She pulled her hand back. The spot where she had touched me suddenly felt cold. I thought you believed in me. Mark and I, we work so hard, and we're just treading water. This was our one big chance to finally get ahead, to build something real. The silence in the kitchen was broken only by the tick-tock of the clock in the hall and Lily's soft humming. The smell of the cookies now seemed cloying too sweet. I looked at my daughter's tear-streaked face, at the brochure promising a perfect future, and at the little girl on the floor who held my entire heart. The conflict inside me was a physical storm. My gut, the part of me that still channeled Tom's cautious pragmatism, was screaming no. But my heart, the part that had been aching with a quiet loneliness, the part that saw my daughter's pain as my own, was screaming louder. How could I say no? How could I be the obstacle standing in the way of her happiness, of my granddaughter's future? I had a comfortable life. She was the one struggling. Wasn't this what a parent was for? To help their child, to lift them up. How much? I asked, my voice a dry rustle of sound. Jessica's head snapped up. A new light, one of fierce, desperate hope, ignited in her eyes. There's a tier for a primary investor. It's $100,000. The number hung in the air, vast and terrifying. It was a substantial piece of my nest egg, the money Tom and I had meticulously saved for a rainy day, for emergencies, for a comfortable old age. It was the sound of a new roof, of years of property taxes, of peace of mind. But Mom, she rushed to say, seeing the shock on my face. The projection shows a return of $220,000 in a year and a half. We'd give you your initial investment back, plus half the profits. You'd have more money than you started with. We'd all be secure. Forever. She slid the brochure back toward me. I stared at the smiling faces, the green hills, the promise of paradise. I looked at Jessica, my only child, her face a mask of hope and anxiety. I was her mother, her hero. And in that moment, the fear of disappointing her was greater than the fear of losing the money. I had to believe in her. I had to. Okay, I said, the word feeling foreign on my tongue. Okay, Jessie, I'll do it. I'll be your partner. The change in her was instantaneous. It was like the sun breaking through a storm cloud. Her face transformed, lit from within by that brilliant, blinding smile. She shot up from her chair and threw her arms around me, squeezing me so tightly I could barely breathe. "Oh, Mom, thank you. Thank you. You won't regret this, I promise. This is going to change everything for us. You'll see. You'll be so proud." Her words were muffled against my shoulder, but I could feel the fierce joy vibrating through her. As I hugged her back, stroking her soft hair, I pushed Tom's cautious voice deep, deep down. I ignored the cold knot in my stomach. I focused on the feeling of my daughter's arms around me, on the sound of Lily's happy humming, and on the beautiful, impossible promise of a perfect future. I chose to believe. It was the first and most expensive mistake of my life. The following week passed in a blur of forced enthusiasm and quiet, gnawing anxiety. The process began with a trip to the bank, a place I'd always associated with security and the comforting solidity of Tom's presence beside me. Now I walked in alone. The air inside was cool and sterile, smelling of recycled air and money. The silence was punctuated by the soft tap of keyboards and the discreet coughs of other customers. It felt like a library for secrets. I sat across a wide, polished mahogany desk from a young man named Mr. Davies. He had a kind, but professionally neutral face. I explained, in a voice that I hoped sounded more confident than I felt, that I wanted to make a wire transfer. $100,000, I said, the words feeling thick and heavy in my mouth. I had to say the number because the requirement was to write it out, not to use digits. So I said it. $100,000. Mr. Davies's eyebrows lifted a fraction of an inch. He looked at me over the top of his glasses. "That's a significant amount, Mrs. Gable. May I ask the purpose of the transfer? It's a standard security question for a sum of this size." My cheeks grew hot. "It's a family investment," I stammered, clutching the piece of paper Jessica had given me. It had the account number and routing information for something called Willow Creek Holdings, LLC. The ink was a crisp, businesslike black on the stark white paper. It felt cold to the touch. "I see," he said, his tone unreadable. He tapped a few keys on his computer. The soft clicking seemed to echo in the vast, quiet room. "Of course. We just need you to sign a few forms to authorize it." He slid the papers toward me. As I picked up the bank's plastic pen, chained to the desk, my hand trembled slightly. I could feel Tom's disapproval, like a cold draft on the back of my neck. "What are you doing, Sarah? You didn't even meet these people. You didn't see a contract." But then I saw Jessica's face in my mind, her eyes shining with gratitude. "This is going to change everything, Mom." I signed my name. The ink flowed, dark and final. I watched on the small monitor as Mr. Davies processed the transfer. A few clicks, a final tap, and it was done. A lifetime of careful saving, of overtime shifts Tom worked, of clipped coupons and modest vacations was gone. It had vanished into the digital ether with a quiet, anticlimactic beep. I left the bank feeling strangely light, as if a part of my own history had been carved out. The sun outside seemed too bright, the sounds of the street too loud. A hollow space had opened up inside me, and I tried to fill it with thoughts of Lily's future and Jessica's happiness. The first few months were filled with a manufactured excitement. Jessica would call, her voice buzzing with energy. "Mom, you won't believe it. They've broken ground." The preliminary surveys came back even better than expected. She'd send me pictures on my phone, blurry photos of tractors on a muddy field, a group of people in hard hats pointing at architectural plans. It all seemed real, plausible. She and Mark took me out to a fancy dinner to celebrate our partnership. Over a table draped in a stiff white cloth, in a restaurant that smelled of garlic and expensive wine, they painted a vivid picture of our shared future. "We're thinking of getting the cabin by the lake," Mark said, swirling his red wine in his glass. He was a softer, less defined person than Jessica, easily carried along by her current of enthusiasm. "Lily would love it, and there's a guest room with its own entrance. It would be for you, Sarah. You could come stay whenever you want. We'll have so much time together," Jessica added, her eyes gleaming in the candlelight. "No more stressing about bills. We can travel. Maybe we'll all go to Italy, like you and Dad always wanted." The mention of Tom sent a sharp pang through my chest, but I smiled. I let their dream wash over me, a warm, comforting tide. I wanted it to be true so badly that I made it true in my mind. For a little while, I lived in that beautiful imaginary cabin by the lake. The first crack in the facade appeared about 3 months later. I was at the grocery store, a place of comforting routine. The smell of fresh bread from the bakery, the cool mist from the vegetable aisle. I was reaching for my usual brand of coffee when I noticed the price had gone up. It wasn't much, just 50 cents, but it was enough to make me pause. I looked in my cart. I had been less careful lately, indulging in a few small luxuries, thinking my big investment would soon pay off. A flicker of unease went through me. I put the expensive coffee back and took the store brand. It was a small thing, but it was a shift. A few weeks after that, the air conditioner in my house gave out. It happened on the hottest day in July, the kind of thick, suffocating heat that makes the air feel like wet wool. The repairman, a kind man with sweat beading on his forehead, gave me the bad news. The compressor was shot. A new unit would cost nearly $5,000. I felt a wave of dizziness. $5,000. Before the investment, that would have been a painful but manageable expense. I had an emergency fund for exactly this sort of thing. But now that fund was part of Willow Creek Holdings, LLC. I called Jessica, my heart thumping against my ribs. I tried to sound casual. Hey honey, bit of a problem over here. The AC died. The real problem is the bill to replace it. I'm a little short right now. I was wondering if it might be possible to get a small advance from the investment, just to cover this. There was a pause on the other end of the line. For the first time, I heard a flicker of irritation in her voice. An advance? Mom, that's not how it works. The money is all tied up in the development, in materials, in permits. We can't just pull it out. It would jeopardize the whole project. Oh, I said, my voice small. The heat in the house felt suddenly more oppressive. I see. I don't have that kind of cash on hand right now. Look, let me talk to Mark, she said, her tone softening a little, but it felt forced. Maybe we can scrape something together from our personal account. But it'll be tight, Mom. Really tight. A few days later, she transferred $2,000 to my account. Not a gift, she explained, but a loan. I would have to pay it back. The conversation was stilted and uncomfortable. I was no longer the benevolent partner. I was a liability. A problem. I had to take the rest out of my dwindling checking account, the money I used for groceries and gas. For the rest of the summer, I kept the new air conditioner set to 78 degrees to save on electricity, and I wore a sweater in my own house. The cold knot in my stomach was back, and this time it was bigger. The calls from Jessica became less frequent. When I did get her on the phone, she sounded rushed, distracted. The bubbly updates about breaking ground and selling plots were replaced with vague complaints about delays. It's the county permits, Mom. So much red tape. It's slowing everything down. Or, we had a problem with a subcontractor. It's a mess, but Mark's handling it. Her excuses were always just plausible enough to keep my hope on life support. But the anxiety was a constant, low-grade fever. I started having trouble sleeping. I'd lie awake at night, the only sound the tick-tock of the grandfather clock, and I'd stare at the dark ceiling, my mind racing. I'd imagine my money, my security, dissolving into a muddy field in the foothills. My sister, Carol, called me one Saturday morning. She's my younger sister, but in many ways the more sensible one. She's a no-nonsense elementary school teacher with a healthy dose of skepticism. So, she said, her voice crisp over the phone, how's the big-shot real estate mogul? Very funny, Carol, I replied, trying to sound breezy. I'm serious, Sarah. How is that investment thing going? You know, the one you sank your entire life savings into without talking to a lawyer or a financial advisor. Her words were blunt, but they came from a place of concern. I had told her about the investment in a moment of weakness, and she had been against it from the start. It's fine, I said, a little too quickly. There are just a few minor delays. It's a big project. These things take time. What kind of delays? She pressed. Oh, you know, permits, contractors, the usual. I was parroting Jessica's excuses, and they sounded flimsy and weak when I said them out loud. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear her thinking, weighing her words. Sarah, she said finally, her voice softer now. I'm your sister and I love you. Please, just be careful. Has Jessica shown you any official paperwork? Any quarterly reports? Anything with a letterhead that isn't from her own printer? Her questions sent a fresh wave of panic through me. I hadn't seen anything. Not a single official document. Just the glossy brochure and the blurry pictures on my phone. She's busy, Carol. She keeps me updated. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. Okay, Carol said, but her tone was full of doubt. Okay, just call me if you need anything. Anything at all. After we hung up, I stood in my silent kitchen, the receiver cold in my hand. The doubt Carol had planted began to sprout, sending ugly, tangling roots through my carefully constructed hope. I decided I needed to see it for myself. I needed to see the progress, to see the cabins going up, to see the tangible proof that my sacrifice had not been in vain. I found the address for the Willow Creek development on the original brochure, which I kept in a drawer like a holy relic. The next morning, I got in my car and drove. It was a beautiful autumn day, the sky a crisp, cloudless blue. The leaves on the trees were just beginning to turn, painting the hills in strokes of gold and crimson. As I drove, I let myself imagine what I would find. A bustling construction site, the frames of new homes reaching for the sky. Maybe I'd even see the spot by the lake where my imaginary guest room would be. The GPS on my phone told me I was getting close. I turned off the main highway onto a smaller, two-lane road, and then onto an even smaller, unpaved gravel road. The car bounced and rattled, kicking up a cloud of dust behind me. The further I went, the more remote it became. The neat suburban houses gave way to overgrown fields and dilapidated farmhouses. A sense of unease began to creep over me, cold and heavy. "You have arrived," the cheerful, robotic voice of the GPS announced. I stopped the car and looked. I was in the middle of nowhere. To my left was a tangled forest of pine and oak. To my right was a vast, empty field, choked with brown weeds and dotted with a few rusting pieces of old farm equipment. There was no construction site, no tractors, no half-finished cabins. There was nothing. There was only a single, weathered wooden sign, hammered crookedly into the ground near the road. The paint was faded and peeling. In faint, barely legible letters it read, "For sale. Willow Creek Acres." Below it, a real estate agent's name and a phone number. I got out of the car. The silence was absolute, broken only by the whisper of the wind through the dead weeds and the frantic, terrified thumping of my own heart. The air smelled of dust and decay. I walked to the sign, my feet unsteady on the uneven ground. I reached out and touched the splintered wood. It was real. The field was real. The emptiness was real. The beautiful brochure, the blurry photos, the excited updates, the promises of a shared future. It was all a lie. A story. A carefully crafted performance for an audience of one. The $100,000 were gone. My safety net was gone. My future, the one Tom and I had so carefully built, was gone. And the person who had taken it all, the person who had looked me in the eye and sold me a fantasy while picking my pocket, was my own daughter. My Jessie. I stood in that empty, windswept field, under that vast, indifferent blue sky, and a single ragged sob tore itself from my throat. The sound was swallowed by the immense, silent landscape, as if it had never happened at all. The drive home was a fugue state of disbelief and a pain so sharp it felt physical. Every detail on the road, a red barn, a flock of birds taking flight, the colors of the autumn leaves, seemed impossibly vibrant and distant, like I was watching my life through a window. The hum of the tires on the asphalt was the only sound, a monotonous drone that did nothing to drown out the screaming in my head. Liar. She lied to you. It was all a lie. When I finally pulled into my own driveway, the sight of my house, my sturdy brick sanctuary, offered no comfort. It looked different, fragile. Its foundation felt as shaken as my own. I walked through the front door into the familiar quiet, the scent of lemon polish and old books now smelling like a museum of a life that was no longer mine. The tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall sounded like a countdown. I didn't cry. The shock was a cold, numbing sheath around my heart. I moved through the house with a strange, robotic calm, making a cup of tea I didn't drink, sitting in Tom's chair and feeling nothing but the worn velvet beneath my fingertips. The sun set, and the house filled with shadows. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat there in the dark, in the ruins. I needed to hear her voice. I needed to hear her say the words, to make it real. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over her name. What would I even say? I went to the empty field where my life savings are buried. My hand was shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I took a deep, shuddering breath and pressed the call button. It rang 3 times, each ring a hammer blow against my skull. "Hey, Mom. What's up?" Her voice was cheerful, normal. So terrifyingly, heartbreakingly normal. The sound of it, so bright and untroubled, cracked the icy numbness around my heart. The pain that flooded in was immense, a tidal wave of betrayal. "Jessie," I said. My own voice was a stranger's, a low, rasping sound. I drove out to the property today. Silence. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound was the faint electronic hiss on the line. I could picture her perfectly, her eyes widening, the cheerful mask falling away, the frantic search for another lie. Oh, she finally said. The single word was flat, devoid of all its previous warmth. Why would you do that? Why? The question was so absurd, so insulting, that a raw, bitter laugh escaped my lips. Why would I do that? I suppose I wanted to see the beautiful community I invested in. The one that holds my entire future. Your future. Lily's future. My voice was rising, trembling with a rage I hadn't known I possessed. But there's nothing there, is there, Jessica? There's no community. There are no cabins. There's just a field of weeds and a for sale sign. So tell me, where is my money? Mom, you don't understand, she started, her voice shifting into a placating, condescending tone. There were complications. The developer, he. Stop. I cut her off, the word sharp as a shard of glass. Stop lying to me. Just for once, stop lying. There is no developer, is there? There's no land trust. There's no project. There was never anything. Another long, damning silence. I could hear her breathing, a little ragged now. When she spoke again, her voice was cold, stripped of all pretense. You shouldn't have gone out there. It wasn't an apology. It was an accusation. I felt the air leave my lungs as if I'd been punched. I shouldn't have? I whispered, incredulous. You stole from me, Jessica. You stole your father's and my life's work. I didn't steal it, she snapped, her voice suddenly shrill. It was a loan. I needed it. Mark lost his job 6 months ago. We didn't want to tell you, didn't want you to worry. He has debts. Big ones. We were going to lose our apartment. Lily, she would have had nothing. The excuses tumbled out, a pathetic, self-serving cascade. Mark's secret gambling problem. Credit card debt that had spiraled out of control. A story of desperation that was meant to make her a victim. But all I could hear was the selfishness. She saw my security not as something to be protected, but as a resource to be plundered. So you built a fantasy, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. You printed a brochure, and you lied to my face. You used my love for you, my love for my own granddaughter, to trick me. I was going to pay you back, she insisted, her voice rising to a shout. I'm going to pay it all back. I just needed some time to get on my feet. Pay it back with what, Jessie? I asked, the cold reality of the situation settling in my bones. The money is gone, isn't it? You've been living on it. The fancy dinners, the new clothes, the rent on your expensive apartment. That was my money. My air conditioner money. The pettiness of that last thought shamed me, but I couldn't stop it. You have the house. You have Dad's pension. You're fine, she yelled. You don't know what it's like out here. How hard it is. The cruelty of that statement finally broke me. The rage, the shock, it all dissolved into a grief so profound it felt like a death. In a way it was. The daughter I knew, the loving, bright girl I had raised, had died. Or maybe she had never existed at all. I am not fine, Jessica, I said, and the tears I had been holding back began to fall, hot and silent, tracking paths through the dust on my cheeks. You have destroyed me. Do you understand that? You have taken everything that made me feel safe in this world. Mom, she started, her voice faltering for the first time, a flicker of something. Was it guilt? Or just the fear of being caught? In her tone. No, I said, finding a sliver of strength from some deep, untouched reserve. Don't say another word. Don't call me. Don't come here. I can't. I can't look at you. I ended the call, my finger jabbing at the screen. The silence that rushed back and was heavier than before, filled with the ghosts of her lies. I slid down the wall in my darkened hallway until I was sitting on the floor, my arms wrapped around my knees. I rocked back and forth, the grandfather clock ticking off the seconds of my new, terrifying life. The house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a cage, a constant reminder of what I had lost, of who I had lost. I had no partner. And now, I had no daughter. I was utterly and completely alone. The days that followed were a gray, featureless landscape of shame and fear. I didn't answer the phone. I let Jessica's frantic calls go to voicemail, her tearful, manipulative messages piling up unheard. Each ring of the phone was a jolt of pain, a reminder of the chasm that had opened between us. I couldn't bear to hear her voice. The practical realities of my situation began to close in like a vice. I sat at the oak kitchen table, the same table where she had sold me her lies, and spread out my bank statements. The numbers stared back at me, stark and unforgiving. Without the cushion of my savings, Tom's pension was just enough to cover the property taxes and the utilities, with a terrifyingly small amount left over for food and other necessities. There was no room for error, no room for another broken air conditioner, a leaky roof, or a medical emergency. I was living on a knife's edge. The shame was a physical weight. It made it hard to breathe, to leave the house. What would I say to my neighbors? To my friends from the book club? The world felt hostile, every face a potential judgment. I had been a fool, a naive, lonely old woman who had been tricked by her own child. The humiliation was a corrosive acid, eating away at what little was left of my self-worth. I lost weight. Food tasted like sawdust. Sleep offered no escape, bringing only nightmares where I was endlessly falling, with nothing to catch me. The house grew dusty. The lemon polish stayed in the cupboard. The silence, once comforting, was now oppressive, amplifying every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the old structure. It was the sound of emptiness. About 2 weeks into my self-imposed isolation, a letter arrived. It was in a crisp, white envelope with a window, the kind that never brings good news. It was from my mortgage company. My heart seized. My mortgage was paid off. Tom and I had thrown a party, burned the papers in a ceremonial bonfire in the backyard 20 years ago. With trembling hands, I tore open the envelope. The legalese was dense and confusing, but a few phrases leaped out at me. Home equity line of credit. Notice of delinquency. Foreclosure proceedings. It didn't make sense. I had never taken out a second mortgage, a line of credit. I read the document again, and then a third time. And then I saw it. The signature on the application, a looping, familiar script. It was a forgery of my name, but it was in Jessica's handwriting. The application was dated 6 months ago, just after I had transferred her the $100,000. A new, deeper level of cold spread through me. The first sum hadn't been enough. After she had bled my savings dry, she had come back for more. She had used my home, my sanctuary, as collateral for her lies. She had forged my name and stolen the very roof from over my head. The bank had apparently approved a line of credit for $75,000. The letter stated that no payments had ever been made. The full amount, plus interest and penalties, was now due. I dropped the letter on the table, as if it were on fire. This was it. This was the end. They were going to take my house. The house Tom had laid the foundation for, the walls that had heard Lily's first laugh, the rooms that held 40 years of my memories. A different kind of feeling began to push through the grief and shame. It was a hard, cold anger, a survival instinct. I couldn't just sit here and let her take everything. I couldn't let her erase my entire life. My first call was not to a lawyer. It was to my sister. As the phone rang, I felt a fresh wave of humiliation. I had ignored Carol's warnings. I had defended Jessica, and now I had to crawl back to her, broken and destitute. "Sarah, is that you? I've been so worried." Her voice was a mixture of relief and anxiety. The dam of my composure broke. The story came out in a torrent of sobs and broken sentences. The empty field, the lies, the stolen savings, and now the foreclosure notice. I told her everything. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just listened. The silence on her end of the line was not judgmental. It was a space for me to pour out my pain. When I was finished, my voice a raw whisper, she spoke, her tone firm and resolute. "Okay," she said. "Okay, Sarah, you're going to pack a bag, and then you're going to get in your car and drive to my house. Right now. We'll figure out the rest together." "I can't," I sobbed. "I can't leave the house." "Yes, you can," she said, her voice unwavering. "You are not staying in that house alone one more night. I'm not taking no for an answer. I'll see you in an hour." And she hung up. The finality of her command was exactly what I needed. It was an anchor in the storm. I moved through the house in a daze, packing a small suitcase. A change of clothes, my toothbrush, the silver-framed photo of Tom from my bedside table. Every object I touched was imbued with a history that was being stolen from me. As I walked out the front door, I didn't look back. I couldn't. The pain was too great. Carol's house was a small, tidy bungalow that smelled of cinnamon and clean laundry. It was the scent of safety. She met me at the door and wrapped me in a fierce, protective hug. It was the first time I had felt another person's touch in weeks, and I sagged against her, the full weight of my despair finally letting go. She led me to her spare bedroom, a cozy room with a handmade quilt on the bed and the soft light of a small lamp. "You're going to rest," she said, "and tomorrow we make a plan." The next morning, fortified by Carol's strong coffee and her unshakable calm, we sat at her kitchen table. She had already been on the phone. She had the name of a lawyer who specialized in financial fraud. She had contacted a support group for victims of family scams. She had, in the space of a few hours, built a lifeboat. "You have two choices, Sarah," she said, her gaze direct and unflinching. "One, we call the lawyer, we report the fraud to the police, and you press charges against Jessica. It's the only way you might have a chance of stopping the foreclosure and recovering any of the money." Press charges. Against Jessica, my own daughter, the mother of my grandchild. The words felt like stones in my mouth. The image of her in a courtroom, of Lily visiting her mother in prison, flashed through my mind. It was unthinkable. "What's the other choice?" I whispered. "The other choice," Carol said, her voice softening with a sad resignation, "is you do nothing. You let the bank take the house. You lose everything. You walk away and try to rebuild from scratch. And you let her get away with it." The choice was impossible. It was a choice between my past and my future, between my daughter and myself. All my life, I had put my daughter first. Every decision, every sacrifice had been for her. But she had taken that love and used it as a weapon against me. We met with the lawyer the next day. He was a kind, weary-eyed man named Mr. Abernathy. He listened to my story with a practiced patience, his face giving away nothing. When I finished, he sighed a long, slow exhalation of air. "Unfortunately, Mrs. Gable, your story is not as uncommon as you might think," he said gently. "Family fraud is a devastating and deeply personal crime. Based on what you've told me, particularly the forged signature on the home equity line of credit, you have a very strong criminal case. We can also file a civil suit to try and recover the assets, but from what you've described, it sounds like the money is long gone. So what does that mean?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "It means," he said, looking at me with a deep, sorrowful empathy, "that pressing criminal charges is likely your only leverage to stop the foreclosure. If she is found guilty of fraud, we can have the loan declared void. You could save your house." "Save my house." The words echoed in the sterile, quiet office. To save my home, I would have to destroy my daughter's life. To protect my past, I would have to incinerate any possibility of a future relationship with her or with my granddaughter. That evening, back at Carol's house, I sat with the decision, the two options laid out before me like two paths into a dark wood. One path led to justice, to a chance at reclaiming my life, but it was paved with an unimaginable betrayal of my own blood. The other path led to utter financial ruin, to a homeless, uncertain future, but it preserved the slim, perhaps foolish, hope of one day seeing my daughter and granddaughter again. Just as I was sinking into the depths of this impossible choice, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Hello? Sarah? It's Mark." My son-in-law's voice was thin and reedy, stretched taut with panic. I hadn't heard from him since this all began. "She's gone, Sarah," he said, his voice cracking. "Jessica's gone. She packed a bag this morning while Lily was at school. She left a note. She said she couldn't face what she did. She took the car and what was left of the money. She left us." The world tilted on its axis. She hadn't just scammed me. She had abandoned her own family, her husband, her child. "And Lily?" I asked, a new, more urgent terror gripping me. "Where is Lily?" "She's here," he sobbed, his voice dissolving into pathetic, gasping breaths. "She's here with me, and I don't know what to do. The landlord is evicting us. We have nowhere to go. Sarah, please. I need help." I hung up the phone, my mind a blank canvas of shock. She was gone. She had taken the last of the stolen money and run, leaving a trail of wreckage behind her. A betrayed mother, a broken husband, and a confused, innocent little girl. My impossible choice had suddenly vanished. There was no longer a decision to be made about pressing charges against a ghost. There was only the reality of what was left. A little girl who had lost her mother. A house on the brink of foreclosure. A future that was a terrifying, empty question mark. The anger, the grief, the betrayal. It was all still there, a raging fire in my chest. But a new feeling was rising from the ashes. A fierce, primal instinct. The instinct of a grandmother. I looked at Carol, my own decision solidifying in my eyes. "I have to go get her," I said. "I have to go get Lily. The fight for my house, for my money, for justice could wait. The fight for my granddaughter had just begun." Driving to what was left of Jessica and Mark's life felt like a journey into a foreign country. Their apartment complex was one of those new, soulless buildings with gray siding and identical balconies, smelling faintly of fresh paint and desperation. The manicured grass was too green, the silence in the hallways too profound. Mark opened the door before I could knock. His face was blotchy and pale, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside. The apartment behind him was in chaos. Boxes were half-packed, furniture was draped in dusty sheets. It had the desolate, transient feel of a place that was no longer a home. And there, sitting on the floor in the middle of the living room, was Lily. She was building a small tower out of plastic blocks, her stuffed rabbit propped up beside her. She was humming the same little tune she always did when she was concentrating, a sound of childhood innocence that was so achingly out of place in this scene of adult collapse. She looked up when she saw me, her wide, blue eyes filled with a heartbreaking confusion. "Grammy," she said, her voice small and uncertain. "Mommy went on a trip." I knelt down in front of her, my heart fracturing into a million pieces. I smoothed her messy blonde curls back from her forehead. Her skin was warm and soft. "I know, sweet pea," I said, my own voice thick with unshed tears. "Grammy's here now." I looked up at Mark, who was watching us, his shoulders slumped in defeat. There was no anger left in me for him, only a weary pity. He was another victim of Jessica's storm, a weak man who had been swept away and left stranded. "The lawyer said we have to be out by the 1st of the month," he mumbled, gesturing vaguely at the boxes. "I have nowhere to take her." "She's coming with me," I said. It wasn't a question or a suggestion. It was a statement of fact. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of purpose, a solid ground beneath my feet. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of logistics and legal battles. With Carol's help, I moved Lily into my house. The guest room, once a dusty repository of old furniture, was transformed into a little girl's bedroom, with a new pink bedspread and glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. The silence of the house was replaced by the sound of Lily's laughter, the chatter of cartoons on the television, and the pitter-patter of small feet on the hardwood floors. She was a tiny, vibrant sunbeam in the vast darkness of my life. Mr. Abernathy, the lawyer, was a godsend. He worked with the bank, presenting them with the police report I had filed for the forgery. It was a long, arduous process, filled with affidavits and mountains of paperwork. The bank was reluctant, but the evidence of blatant fraud was undeniable. They finally agreed to suspend the foreclosure proceedings pending a full investigation. My home was safe, at least for now, but it was a hollow victory. The $75,000 was still a debt hanging over my head, a constant, crushing reminder of my daughter's betrayal. Mark, adrift and broken, eventually moved back in with his parents in another state. He called every Sunday to speak to Lily, his voice filled with a helpless, distant love. He had no resources to fight for custody, no home to offer her. By default, I became her guardian. Life settled into a new, strange rhythm. I was no longer a retiree living a quiet, solitary life. I was a 62-year-old single parent. My days were structured around school drop-offs and pickups, homework and bedtime stories. I packed lunches, I bandaged scraped knees, I learned the names of all the characters in her favorite shows. We built forts out of blankets in the living room and had tea parties with her stuffed animals on the oriental rug. Lily rarely asked about her mother. Children, I learned, have a remarkable capacity for accepting a new reality when it is stable and filled with love. But sometimes at night, I would hear her crying softly in her room. I would go to her, and she would cling to me, her small body trembling. "I miss my mommy," she would whisper into my shoulder, and I would hold her tight, my own heart aching, and murmur, "I know, sweet pea. I know." In those moments, my anger at Jessica would flare up, hot and fierce. How could she do this? How could she abandon this beautiful, perfect child? The financial strain was immense. I took on a part-time job at the local library, shelving books for a few hours a day. The scent of old paper and binding glue became the new scent of my survival. My hands, once soft, became dry and calloused from the work. I sold my car, the one Tom and I had bought for our retirement road trips, and bought a smaller, older model. I learned to be a master of budgeting, to stretch every dollar until it screamed. I clipped coupons, I planted a vegetable garden in the backyard, I learned to mend clothes instead of buying new ones. It was a hard life, a life I had never imagined for myself. There were days when the exhaustion was a physical weight, when the fear of the future was a suffocating blanket. But then Lily would run into my arms after school, her face bright with a story about her day, and the exhaustion would recede. She would draw me a picture, a lopsided heart with the words, "I love you, Grammy," written in crayon, and the fear would feel a little less powerful. She was my reason. She was my anchor. She was the unexpected gift born from an unbearable loss. One evening, about a year after Jessica had disappeared, I was tucking Lily into bed. She was quiet, her gaze fixed on the plastic stars on her ceiling. "Grammy," she said softly, "is Mommy ever coming back?" I sat on the edge of her bed, the quilt soft beneath my hand. The question hung in the air, a fragile, hopeful thing. I had debated for months what I would tell her, how I would explain the unexplainable. I looked at her trusting, innocent face, and I knew I couldn't give her a lie, no matter how comforting it might be. But I couldn't give her the whole, ugly truth either. "Not yet. I don't know, sweet pea," I said honestly, my voice gentle. "Your mommy, she got very lost. Sometimes when people get lost, it takes them a long, long time to find their way home. But you know what? No matter what happens, you are home. Right here. With me. And I will always, always be here to take care of you. I love you more than all the stars in the sky." She seemed to accept that. She snuggled deeper under the covers, her breathing evening out into the soft rhythm of sleep. I watched her for a long time, this small, resilient person who had saved me from the wreckage of my own life. I never heard from Jessica again. The police investigation went cold. It was as if she had vanished from the face of the earth, leaving nothing behind but a mountain of debt and a trail of broken hearts. Sometimes I would allow myself to wonder where she was. Was she happy? Did she ever think of her daughter? Did she feel a single flicker of remorse for what she had done? I suspected I would never know the answers. My life was not the one I had planned. The comfortable, quiet retirement Tom and I had worked so hard for was gone, replaced by a life of struggle and sacrifice. But it was not an empty life. My house, once a silent museum of the past, was now filled with the chaos and joy of a child. It was a home again. My heart, which had been shattered by betrayal, had been painstakingly pieced back together by the unconditional love of my granddaughter. I had been scammed by my own daughter. I had lost my savings, my security, and the child I thought I knew. Nobody could ever imagine what that felt like. But in the aftermath of that devastation, I had found something else. I had found a strength I never knew I had. I had found a new purpose. And in the eyes of the little girl sleeping peacefully in the next room, I had found a new kind of future. It was a harder future, a different future, but it was a future nonetheless. And for the first time in a very long time, it was one I was no longer afraid to face.